Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Andrus. I'm the Vice President of the Democratic Party of Evanston. This is part of our video series in the lead up to our endorsement event. As some of you may remember in previous years, we typically held our endorsement event in a big room and the candidates got up on stage and spoke for 2-3 minutes about themselves. Obviously, we can't do that this year, so we're hosting our endorsement event online. Ballots will go out on January 17th, and they're due in by January 23rd, and we're using the website electionrunner.com, which is a secure way to cast votes to hold elections online. So here today we have Alderman Eleanor Revelle, who is the current 7th Ward Alderman and running for re-election. So why don't you take a few minutes, Eleanor, and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks, Greg. I'm happy to be here. I'm Eleanor Revelle. I'm the current 7th Ward Alderman. I've been on the council now for 5 years. I've lived in Evanston since the 1970s, moved here with my husband, who is a professor at Northwestern University. And our 2 children are proud graduates of Orrington Haven and ETHS, and really enjoyed the experience living in a community like Evanston. And I've been really honored to be able to represent the residents of the 7th Ward and looking forward to an additional term.
Fantastic, thank you. So getting right into our first question, it's a fairly broad one, but how well do you feel that the city of Evanston has upheld its goal of assessing decisions and policies through a lens of equity?
Well, I think it's going to be a long process for us to really feel that we've gotten as far as we want to go. But I do see increasingly the goals of equity being embedded in a lot of our plans and programs and initiatives. For example, even our climate action and resilience plan is an equity-centered plan. We just passed an environmental justice resolution, which is setting the stage now for work on an environmental justice ordinance. And so I think, well, and then we have our reparations program, which is a hugely oriented towards achieving some greater equity for our Black residents. So I do think it's a issue that is salient with our residents and with the City Council, and we're doing our best to make progress on that front.
Thank you very much. So this one, the question came to us, it was on the subject of policing, but it also has another question embedded in it about sort of your style of taking comments from constituents. So how do you go about listening to and weighing conflicting calls from constituents who want less conventional police presence and those who want more?
Well, I have to say I've heard from more residents, not necessarily just the 7th Ward, but more residents who are interested in seeing less presence from the police and greater investment in our social services and mental health. But I have heard from residents as well who are disturbed about the word defunding and wondering what that means. So I have tried, for that second group, I've tried to explain what I understand or where I'm headed, which is to say, well, our police budget is roughly 1/3 of our general operating fund budget, and that seems to me to leave room for us to be able to redirect some funds. And we certainly have big mental health needs in the community and homelessness issues, and so I really would like to see us move more funds towards those programs. But then on the other hand, what I tried to tell residents who are interested in seeing us do that more quickly is that I do think it is going to be a gradual process. For my part, I'm working on an alternative 911 response program that would send mental health professionals and public health professionals in the place of a uniformed police officer to respond to certain kinds of 911 calls for service. And so I think that will help. Those will be funds that are not coming from the police department budget, for example. And so that's one way we're trying to redirect some funds. I think it will also help with people who are concerned about over-policing in our community. And then another thing that I think we need to do if we're really going to make progress on decreasing that police budget is we should do a staffing study of the Evanston Police Department. 2 or 3 years ago, there was an outside review of our police department to look for greater efficiencies and changes that they would make and recommendations they would make about our police department operations. They made a number of really good recommendations that the police department has implemented, but the last recommendation has not yet been implemented, and that is to do a staffing study, but hasn't been done for quite a few years. So I would support our doing that kind of a staffing study, but in concert with, I think what we really need also is a community conversation to hear from all parts of the community about just what do people want from our police department and what are their views of public safety in Evanston. So I think that's probably going to take some kind of outside expertise to help us have that conversation, but I think that's a way that we have to follow to be able to move forward on this.
Okay, thank you. And there was a follow-up question there. What have you been doing to assure Black and Brown constituents that they are not being unfairly policed and that individual officers are held accountable for infractions?
Well, I certainly have heard from the Evanston Fight for Black Lives members, and they do share with me stories that about their feelings of being over policed and therefore not feeling safe. And so I think that I think we have a good complaint process in place, and I certainly hope that any resident who feels that they've been unfairly over policed or whatever, that they would file a complaint about that, so it can work its way through the process and come to Human Services. It's hard for me to really know if we're making any progress in that direction.
Okay, so the next couple of questions are about police oversight. The first one is about FOIAs, especially those made to the Evanston Police Department, have become something of a contentious issue. What do you believe the City Council can do to promote transparency and accountability on this issue?
Well, for the FOIA issue, I think there we're dealing with state FOIA laws that say what you can and can't post online. So I think those kind of FOIA requests are appropriate for the police department to handle. But I guess in terms of greater transparency, I think our community members have questions about our police practices and what is our policy for use of force and issues like that. And so for them, I would recommend that they go to the website, web pages for our police department, and they can watch. There was a series of Q&As this summer that went over all these intricate issues about police policies and procedures and oversight and all those things. I heard from residents who did watch those Q&A sessions, and they found them really very helpful to understand exactly how our police department works. And also on that web page, there's an extensive FAQ with a lot of questions and answers about the police policies that we have. So I think if our residents understood a little bit better just what kinds of policies we have in place for our police department, that would help them feel more comfortable.
Thank you. So the next question is also about police oversight. And this one is about the oversight board, which is currently mayoral appointed. Do you believe that Evanston should have an independent board or an elected board?
Well, first of all, this new commission has only been in place a few months, and so my inclination would be to let them have an experience for a couple of years, and then we can evaluate how that process seems to be working. The former review commission, the members were appointed by the police chief, so the new commission being appointed by the mayor is a step away from that. And the members that he appoints have been, the names have been shared with the city council ahead of time. So there's been, I think, good input as to whether the commission members are independent thinking people. And so my strong inclination is to let that commission do its work for a couple of years and then have some conversations to see how we think it's going.
Okay. And then the last question we had about policing involved a specific incident. Recently, the city of Evanston made use of the NIPAS or NIPAS, I've heard it both ways, to respond to protests over at the university. This is the incident on Halloween as well as a few others. Do you believe that the level of oversight the city has over NIPAS is sufficient? And what would you do to make this relationship more transparent and accessible to Evanston residents?
Right. Well, along with, I think, a lot of Evanston residents were, really, really disturbed at what we saw in the Halloween incident. I thought, though, we had an extensive discussion with Chief Cook about that at a Human Services meeting earlier this week, I guess. And I thought he did a good job of explaining just why he feels that this NIPAS group is important to belong to and to bring into the community for certain kinds of incidents. I have to say, though, and then after that meeting, someone shared with me a photo of a NIPAS officer, and you could see very clearly that his identification number was taped over. And I didn't see a body camera either. So I think Chief Cook said that he was the officer in charge of this outside force, but I think he needs to find a way to really make sure that, number one, we can identify who they are, and number two, that they have body cameras and those body cameras are operating. And the fact that their identification number is taped over means we don't know what community I think that's how we would find out what community they're from in order to do some kind of a FOIA request if we wanted to do one. But my understanding, since it's not technically a governmental agency, it's not technically a group that we can submit FOIAs to. It's a very difficult situation. So I think we need to have continued conversations with Chief Cook about the group and find out, just how is he going to make sure that he, as the operations in charge person, if they come to town, that they do follow our policies and that they behave the way we expect our Evanston police to behave.
Thank you very much. So the next few questions are a little bit broader, and they concern the government itself. So the first one is there anything about the culture of our city government that you would like to see changed?
Culture being a broad word there. I guess what I think of when you phrase that question is the city council meetings themselves. And I know a lot of frustrations on the part of our citizens with the public comment process, and especially if there are a lot of people signed up that they get 30 seconds or a minute, and it hardly seems like they can say much of anything. And then, of course, they ask us questions and we just sit there. So a number of residents have suggested, and I do think this would be really a good change for us to make, would be to have a staff person taking notes about the questions, and we put together the answers for those questions, and those go up on the website for any resident who shares those kinds of questions. The other thing I would suggest is, I mean, we as council members begin thinking about some of these more difficult issues well before the night of the vote on the city council. And so I would encourage, and I do hear from my residents, you know, early enough in the process. So if they really want to make sure I know their opinion before I make my own mind up, I encourage them to contact me ahead of time. Also coming to the standing committee before the issue gets up to the city council. So planning and development, for example, we go into great detail about a lot of these, you know, pretty controversial issues. So it's important to take advantage of all those opportunities to share viewpoints with those of us on the council.
I've heard a lot of different interpretations of that question.
You're
Oh, I'm sorry. A lot of different interpretations of that question too.
Right.
So it's
Yes,
always an interesting answer. The next one is, can you comment on the benefits and challenges of Evanston's home rule status? And what are your feelings on the current council manager form of government?
right. Well, I think having home rule status is really important. When I hear from residents and communities that don't have home rule, and they are pretty frustrated that they can't do things that we in Evanston can do. And it's annoying sometimes when the state preempts our home rule capabilities. There have been a couple of times where we would really like to be able to have be able to govern something locally, but we can't because the state has preempted it. I'm thinking in particular of pesticide use on private property. We can say what we do and don't want on city property, but we can't tell residents what they can and can't put on their property. So yes, I'm glad we're a home rule community. I'm also glad that that we have council manager form of government. I'm a longtime member of the League of Women Voters, and the League was a key organization back in the 50s that urged a yes vote on the referendum to make Evanston have the council manager form of government. And I think the idea of having a professional city manager taking direction from the elected city council is a good system for the city.
Thank you very much. So moving on to the next topic, it's a question that came into us, and it's about the environment. They want to hear your thoughts on the Climate Action Resilience Plan. So it has the goal of the carbon neutral Evanston by 2050. And what do you feel are the biggest challenges we face in reaching that goal? And do you feel that the goal is ambitious enough, or would you like to see changes made to it?
Well, to go to the last part of your question first, I certainly think it is ambitious enough because we've got a lot of work to do to get to that point. The Climate Action and Resilience Plans has lots of different action steps that we need to be taking, and getting moving on the most urgent ones first is something we should do. That although they're the 2050 targets, there are also some interim targets for 2025 and 2035. So I think we need to be getting to work seriously on those 2025 goals. One of them is to do with our building efficiency. So it's time for us to tighten up our building codes, for example, to have any new building be much more energy efficient and move towards actual electrification of all of our buildings, getting away from natural gas. Another area is in reducing our solid waste, and we are not doing nearly as well as our neighbors, and in particular our commercial waste diversion rate is pretty pathetic. So we recently approved a change in how the commercial waste is going to be, what the charges are going to be. So there's going to be funding to have a new staff person who can work with our commercial businesses to help them understand how they can save money by doing more recycling. And what is our third area that we have? Oh, I know, we also talk about being 100% renewable energy by 2030, I think it is. But in order to do that, for example, it would be really nice if we could expand our community aggregation program to the larger businesses in the community. But to do that, we need to get the state legislature to allow us to expand our aggregation program. So if we're going to make headway there, I think we need to enlist our neighboring communities to also work on our state legislature to make that change for us. So
Thank you.
I could talk about CARB.
Well, thank you for that. So the next question, we move on to the budget. Do you feel overall that expenditures by the City of Evanston over the last 4 years have appropriately reflected the priorities, needs, and interests of Evanston residents?
Generally speaking, yes. I think our residents have very high expectations from the city in terms of services, and that requires a lot of staff members and good staff members, and that's where the bulk of our budget goes. So I think ensuring that we can deliver those services that our residents expect is a really important function of the government. Every time we have a budget, the annual budget process, though, it's very painful to try to fund all the services that we know we need, and yet keep our taxes as low as we possibly can. We have big catch up to do on our police and fire pension funds, and we need to rebuild our rainy day fund. So it's always a tough challenge at that time of budget.
Okay. So even before the pandemic, it seemed as though downtown Evanston was full of empty storefronts. And of course, that's only gotten worse. What do you believe can be done to promote development in a way that prioritizes small businesses and local ownership?
Well, it's quite, as you say, it's quite true that even before the pandemic, our small businesses were struggling given the trend to ordering things online, and yet I think our residents and residents from nearby communities really value our unique, smaller retail, our businesses. So they are really where we need to be focusing our energies to, help them recover. I think our economic development staff is really good at coming up with ideas and ways to streamline the process for any businesses, and we can certainly do more of that. I think during the pandemic, we found ways to be flexible with some of our rules and regulations to allow businesses to continue to operate in some new and different ways. In the 7th Ward, for example, Mustard's Last Stand is now got permission for a short period of time to get through the winter months with a little kiosk where people can pick up their hot dogs and not have to stand in line outside, because you can't go into the Mustard's inside is too small for social distancing. So this would be a way for people to be able to continue to enjoy Mustard's hot dogs without having to stand out in the cold. And that took some, work on, flexible kinds of arrangements through our economic development staff. And we need to keep trying to do more of that.
So the last one on the finance and development moves on to residential development. Despite the number of new residential units constructed in Evanston over the last few years, especially in some of the high rises approved by City Council, housing costs in Evanston continue to rise. Do you feel that the inclusionary housing ordinance is doing enough to combat this? And what solutions would you like to see implemented?
Well, I think it's a mistake to expect our inclusionary housing ordinance to do the full job for us. We did strengthen the ordinance a couple of years ago to require at least half of the required affordable units to be built on site. And we also increased the fee in lieu. But there's a lot more that we can and should be doing in Evanston to provide and create and support more affordable housing. And so number one, we should get back to work on the affordable housing plan that was underway until the pandemic hit, and the committee's not been able to meet for several months. And we should do a review and audit of our zoning code, because our zoning code is really holding us back from developing more affordable housing in all parts of the community. We need to revise the ordinance to allow more types of housing and more sizes of housing on smaller lots, and do that throughout in all the neighborhoods of Evanston, so that we can have truly affordable housing throughout the community. So I think those are the kinds of things that are going to help us make some headway on affordable housing. And one thing that we did do just this last year is we made revisions to the ordinance for auxiliary dwelling units. And so these are the smaller. We allow now for a coach house to be rented to a non-family member, and we've also now permit auxiliary dwelling units that are part of the house, for example, a basement unit. And so those are, because they're smaller, they're going to be, by definition, more affordable in terms of renting. And they'll also provide some income then to the homeowner to help with housing expenses. So it can help two families at once with some affordable housing kinds of assistance.
Okay. This next question is about Ward 7 specifically. So Northwestern University has a huge impact on the city, but the students typically have very little impact on local elections. Since your ward includes the campus, I wanted to hear your thoughts on motivating the students to become more engaged locally.
Yeah, well, especially with the pandemic, in a non-pandemic year, I would say, yes, I would be approaching the Student Government Association to say, are you going to have debates? And, there'd be more opportunity to actually try to directly engage with the students. I think in a time of a pandemic, that's going to be really, really challenging. I get regular phone calls from various reporters from the Daily Northwestern. But other than that, I don't really hear from students very much.
So the next couple of questions, I'm asking of all the incumbents. When you first joined City Council, and for you that was 5 years ago, I believe, what was your #1 priority? And do you feel that you've achieved that goal?
Well, my #1 priority, I'm going to be a broken record, was affordable housing. And I guess the reason I want to continue is because I do feel that's a big piece of unfinished business for me. I am on the Affordable Housing Plan Steering Committee, and I am committed to our coming up with a really strong affordable housing plan, and starting to see it get implemented. So I would hope that would certainly happen in my next term. And then if we're going to try to do something about our zoning code, that would be certainly something that I would want to, make sure got started. So I do definitely have some unfinished business.
So the final question I've got for you here, of your time on the council, what's one city council decision that you most disagree with?
Disagree with? Wow. Well, I guess one of the downtown development proposals, I opposed the Albion project, for example. I felt it was just really too big for a location that was supposed to be in a transition zone for the downtown. So I guess that's the one I'd point to.
All right, thank you very much. So typically at the end here, and if you're willing, we have a couple of minutes yet. I like to open it up to questions from, I see we've gathered a small audience here. Would you be willing to stick around for a couple of minutes and take any questions? Okay, so for the people who are watching, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves. I just ask that you try not to speak over each other, only ask one question at a time. Hasn't really been a problem so far, but okay, so you can now unmute yourselves, and if you have any questions, go ahead. All right, I'm not seeing any questions from the crowd, so thank you so much for joining us, Eleanor, and have a great evening.
Yep.
Have a great weekend.
That's great.